Hi, I'm Dave Van Oss, Agricultural Markets Manager for Libro Credit Union. Libro is very excited to be this year's presenting sponsor for the Virtual Outdoor Farm Show. We truly hope that your farm business finds great value with this upcoming session.
I'm John Gregg, editor of Farmterio. We hear lots about automation being developed for crop farms these days, but most of it is early stage and not that much actually being used on farms. Chuck Baresich, general manager of Hagerty Creek, has both small and large autonomous units put to work in his fields. Hi, Chuck, and welcome to Canada's Digital Farm Show.
Good morning, John.
So tell us about Hagerty Creek, which is the name you work under, what it is and what you do there.
It's always hard to describe, but it's a crop retail business and grain elevator located, we call it in the Four Counties area. So, if you put London, Chad, and Sarnia on the map and put a dot in the middle of that triangle, that's kind of where we are. And we service farmers in this area, both from grain, from an agronomy business and a precision agriculture business as well. My brother Justin and I also farm cash crop as well in the area.
So tell us why you have invested in automation at Hagerty Creek.
I think robotics and automation have always interested me. It's been like an interest ever since I can't really remember when. I've always liked, the concept of, robots and automated vehicles and these types of things, whether you can blame that on Star Wars or whoever you want to blame it on. But I've always had an interest in it. And when we got our first auto steer system in, I think it was 2004, we made a few rounds in the tractor. And I think it was my brother who said, why are we in this cab? This tractor's driving itself. How come it can't just, why do we need to be in here? And so as I've watched automation in other industries, obviously, in automotive and manufacturing and these types of things, other industries have automated their processes. The livestock industry, to a large degree, is automated as much as they can. Whether you're looking at laying hens, automatic pig sorters, obviously in the dairy industry, so the livestock industry, they've done it. And for whatever reason, in outside agriculture, in fields and things, it hasn't progressed nearly as quickly as what I, kind of thought. I kind of figured we'd see some automated stuff 10, 12 years ago, but we really haven't progressed past, the auto steer portion. And so as workload increases, as the number of passes in the fields increase, as the amount of time that we spend doing things, and automation becomes more and more of interest. And in our area, where we are, we can't afford mistakes. So planting and all this kind of stuff needs to be done precisely and perfectly. So that means driving the right speed at the right time and not going too fast and watching what you're doing. And automating a process would just help that so much. So that's where my interest level has come from. And I've been kind of watching other people work on projects. So I think I don't want to be a little unfair that no one's working on it. People have working on it. So I'm at the process to say, okay, how do we move this forward, and how do we push this, to the next stage where I can actually be using it.
And how much, so you have some aptitude for that and an interest in it. Where are we at as far as it making sense for other farmers?
One of the things that I discovered is that there are lots of companies releasing press releases and doing sales pitches, and there's very few who are actually have a workable product that someone can actually use. That was the first thing that I found. So I think in general, things are not as far along as what I expected. So that's from the companies actually making the automated processes. And I think as farmers, we're not ready either. We're not nearly as ready as we think we are. We need to have our fields in good shape. We need to have a plan as to what are we going to use the automated process for. in how it's going to be deployed. So those two things, they kind of work hand in hand. And the other thing too, as farmers, that we're not ready for is, boy, we are not very standardized. Everybody has their own idea as to, what row width and row spacing and speed and tillage implement and tool and fertilize. Like we have so much inconsistency on the farmer side that is also a challenge and something that we're going to have to overcome.
People have made the point to me when I've asked, why have we not automated crops compared to your good point, the livestock sector, that there's too much variability among farms, among fields, among parts of fields, and that's one of the barriers. Is that something that can be overcome?
I think in the field side of things, that for sure can be overcome. We can definitely see tile drainage, making sure that the boundaries of your fields are clear of tree limbs, not having obstacles in the fields. Those things I think we can overcome. And variability within the field as far as clay and sand and hill, I think we can overcome that too. So we're doing it now. So that can be overcome. What we need to work on is some sort of agreement on, fertilizer application, fertilizer type, tillage type, that kind of standardization is the next piece. And then when we're working, one of the projects we're working on is the auto cart and grain carts. And one of the issues we have here, every farmer has a different size wagon, different size truck, which does not lend itself to automation very well.
So let's talk about what you have done in your operation. First, let's start on the small side. You've made use of the RoamIO robot. Tell me how you made use of that and what you thought of it.
What we've used it for to this point is we have used it to carry our soil optic sensor, and that I think is a pretty straightforward application for the Romeo unit. It's nice and light. It's small. It can travel across the field where a John Deere Gator, that kind of stuff, cannot. But we also have other ideas for it. So we mounted an APV spreader on the back of the Romeo unit and used it to spread red clover. That actually worked very, very well. Again, it's another one of these tasks that can be automated very easily. So we use that on there, and I think there's no reason why we can't use it for the broadcasting of cover crops, going through fields where you require a small footprint. There's no reason why we can't carry other sensors and things on this tool. That some other companies are developing, and I also foresee using it for spraying, doing spraying applications and this type of stuff. So that's where we see the use of the Romeo. So there's certain things that are we don't need a giant machine to use.
And for those who haven't seen it, can you explain what the Romeo looks like and how it functions?
So what the Romeo is a small autonomous vehicle. I would say about the size of a riding lawnmower. That would be the best way to describe it. It's on tracks, and I like the fact that it's on tracks because it distributes its own weight. And the unit that we commissioned from Korechi is approximately 5 feet wide and approximately 5 feet long, so like a 5x5. And it stands about 2 feet high, I think it weighs 350 pounds. And the unit has an 8-hour battery so that it should be able to run a typical workday in the field, running its application. That is the one that we use. Beyond that, there's not much else to it. It's a square block on tracks, and that was the design. On top of the Romeo unit, you can mount, various attachments. So if you wanted to mount like a 2-row planter, a 100-gallon sprayer, a spreader that can carry 300 or 400 pounds, 500 pounds of product. It is designed with a low center of gravity that you can mount all these attachments on the top. And it is controlled by a tablet that does not need to be anywhere near the unit. So, so theoretically, I can monitor, once it's deployed to a field, we can monitor the Romeo unit from my office wherever we want to be. So that's kind of in general what it's used for. In our application, we tend to use it in tandem with a person in the field. So for example, when we're soil sampling, the intention is that my CSM will head to the field with the Romeo and with the Gator at the same time. They would both go to let's say it's a 150 acre farm that needs to be soil sampled. They will assign Romeo half and they'll do half. Or they might assign Romeo 100 acres and they'll do 50 acres. And so while Romeo is doing its part, my staff can be collecting whatever samples they need to collect, kind of following the Romeo in behind. But that way, the whole job is done all at the same time. Rather than the current process is my employee has to drive the whole field first. Then when we're done the field, then they need to go over back, collect a few soil samples to calibrate the velocity sensor. And that process takes time. So they can be doing the follow-up process while the Romeo is finishing up the grid scheme. And so the thinking is that it should speed the process up quite significantly. The other piece that I see using the Romeo unit for, if let's say that it's out spreading a cover crop on a field, well, it can be out spreading the cover crop while my employee is running to get more seed or going to talk to another customer or just talking to the farmer. At the end of the day, if you have somebody out there in the Gator, they're not doing the sales calls that they should be doing. That's where I see the use of this unit.
And then you were the first to have a working dot power, power unit in Ontario, which was at Canada's Outdoor Farm Show last year and created a lot of interest.
Yep.
How did you end up with that first one, and how did you put it to use in your first spring that you had it?
So I guess I've seen the dot unit. I've been following it for several years. I was quite excited to see it come to Woodstock last year. They had called me and told me that it was on its way there back in the summer of 2019. So I went to see it, and I met with the folks from DOT at the time. Looked over what it would be like, and from there I went to Regina to the research farm in October. To actually see the dot units in action. One thing to see it at the farm show, it's another thing to actually see it being used. And when I was watching the dot units running, they were dirty. They were filling them with fertilizer in the yard. They had two of them. They had an auger set up. And so what that gave me a good sense of is this is what it would actually be like. Because one of the obvious questions is how do you ever even use this? Like, how would you deploy it? Like, how would you bring fertilizer to it? Like, how, and until you actually see it in the field being used or in the farmyard being used, that's when you actually see, there's something to this. Then the wheels start turning. So this is how I would fill it. And this is how I would deploy it. And so I had some long drawn out discussions with the DOT people over the course of the winter. They were reluctant to send one outside of Saskatchewan, only from a service and support. How do you, they were worried about, who's going to fix it and who's going to maintain it, and something is going to break, and they knew that it would. And I guess I made those assurances to them that not only would I be able to fix it, but I wouldn't broadcast it. Maybe, here's what's broken, right? I would be decent about it. And there were some things that broke. Okay, we're not going to deny that. But anyways, they agreed to send one, and so we agreed to purchase a dot unit and send it to Ontario. I started with small steps. I said fertilizer spreader is something that is pretty common technology. It's something that, it's one thing to learn how to use a robot. It's another thing to learn how to use it with a planter or something. So I said, let's start with the fertilizer spreader. And so it arrived, and I think the first we were quite excited about it. We rushed out the first couple fields and got some things going. We had some issues at the start. Things that, we had big plans the first day to spread 400 acres of fertilizer, and I think we did about 100 because we just weren't ready. But as time went on, we got closer and closer to that, sort of expected volume that you would expect to see with a fertilizer spreader. As time went on, we ended up doing just over 1,400 acres with the dot unit this spring, and it came late. Like, I don't think we didn't start using it until about the 20th of May. So we actually did pretty well, we thought, in the usage.
And so what, you're not buying this to just spread fertilizer. What do you see your progression in the use of the DOT platform to be?
Well, my vision of the DOT platform is going to be, I think it lends itself really well. I would call it a low speed precision task is what it lends itself towards. So a planter of some type, I think, is an obvious choice. So what we're looking at is, obviously a corn planter, soybean planter would be for spring of 2021. We're looking at, strip till fertilizer would be an obvious choice. We don't have livestock ourselves, but it would look really good on that unit pulling a manure drag line up and down the field. I think it would just work perfect. Either drag lining manure or injecting manure, I think it would work really well. And the vision of the DOT unit again is it becomes your hired hand. So when we look at, if I have my dream world vision of the autonomous system, what we would see is my brother would head to the field with our corn planter, and he would bring the DOT unit with him. So the two of them would go to the field together. He would fill everything up with fertilizer, and he would plant the headlands. So he would plant the headlands in the field. He would square up along the hydro poles. He would he would do all of the, kind of that goofiness that every farmer has. And the DOT unit would infill everything else. So it would be as simple of him saying, okay, DOT, you've seen what I'm doing. You go do everything else. So when my brother has done his part of the field, the DOT unit would just stay there and finish everything else. And it should have enough capacity to plant, 60, 70, 80 acres on a fill-up. So we would have enough capacity to finish that farm. And maybe my brother goes home at supper time and just doesn't come back till the morning and the DOT unit is done. Like that could be one outcome, or the other outcome is my brother heads to the next farm, starts planting the next farm. He gets it laid out. When it is ready, the DOT unit has finished the first farm, he brings it over to the next farm, lets it do its thing while he goes and has lunch. Or, the other piece too is, he goes through and he can check, how deep is it planting? Should we be planting that deep? Is this the right, is everything going, are the no-till poulters set correctly? Are the tractors set correctly? And as the DOT unit is running up and down the field, he can be changing those settings while the DOT unit is running. On our ground around here, that we cannot have mistakes. Like if you goof something up at planting time, there's no recovery. And so all of these things are very important to us. So that is one way that I see using it. The other way that I see using the DOT unit is that in the fall, that we no-till everything on our own farm. It works really good around us. We haven't worked our ground for probably 25 years. What we would really like to get into is in the fall, when the soybeans and corn are coming off, is to start strip tilling some fertilizer in the fall. Well, now we don't need that extra person. We don't have that extra person. We don't have them to be doing that. So now as the soybeans are coming off, the DOT unit can be strip tilling the fertilizer and in behind the corn planter. While my brother is in the farm or while I'm in the field combining, the DOT unit can be doing that task that otherwise doesn't get done. That is kind of where my vision of the DOT unit is headed. Hopefully that's pretty clear.
Yeah, that makes sense. So my question for you is so in your planting scenario, you'd have to have two planters in your in your system, you could get to the point where you only would need one planter for dot, or do you think you're always going to need the human tractor implement backup?
I think for the next few years, it's going to be hard to get away from having a person. Like, somebody still has to bring fertilizer to the field. Somebody still has to bring seed to the field. And you know what? You still have to check to see what it's doing. I think it's a bit of a pipe dream to say, I'm going to send a robot to a field that's going to know exactly how deep to plant, that's going to know all of these things. I do not see a machine replacing the person's knowledge of what needs to be done. A machine can replace the physical labor, but it can't replace the brain. And I think that's, at the end of the day, that's the same struggle that people have even with staff. I don't need to hire laborers anymore. I need to hire intelligence, you know, and we require that anymore in this day and age. And this is where, if we can hire the intelligence to do the right job, we don't need them doing the manual labor. We can make a machine do the manual labor.
You're making the dot your hired hand to do the labor in many ways. Yeah. And
a lot of farmers don't have enough critical mass to justify a full-time employee year-round. Mm-hmm. They really don't. And so this is where the dot unit becomes that temporary help. And especially if we move into more edible soybeans, more organic production, more vegetable crops, these types of things. Once we move into autonomous equipment that can weed and kill weeds and do that kind of stuff for us, it will enable farmers to grow those crops, cost effectively as well. That's where this is leading.
In the conversations I've had with the dot people, they're from Saskatchewan, broad acre farming. They said, well, you're going to need 5 of these to make it make sense. And, I thought through some of the economics. I said, well, in Ontario, I'm not really sure that's the case. There's a lot of other factors that what else do you do, right? What else does the farmer do that if you can replace the person or the equipment with that automation solution, it's, you can make the finances work. So how do you see it fitting in on the Ontario market?
I'd be really surprised if farmers in Ontario would have more than one dot unit. And if they did, the only reason why they would do it is that they'd be doing more than one task. I think where the dot unit comes in is if you can have, rather than having 2 corn planters, if you can have a second one that does not need a tractor, that does not need an employee, there's huge cost savings. And I did some math on that if you have a farmer that is growing, let's say 2,000 acres of corn, this kind of thing, and I just use corn as a simple, obviously it could be like 2,000 acres of crops, that kind of stuff. Rather than having that second planter where you require a second planter, a second tractor, a second employee, now you have a dot power unit that becomes that second unit. When you're done with that second planter, that dot unit now becomes the sprayer. You are spreading the depreciation cost of that machine over 2 or 3 implements over more and more acres. And so one of the problems that we have in cash crop farming is farmers own tractors where they only put 150 hours a year on these tractors, or 200. It's really hard to justify the depreciation cost of that equipment. And the dot unit, because you're taking that piece of equipment, instead of saying, well, I'm going to buy this piece of equipment and it's going to do 1,000 acres, okay? Well, now that same piece of equipment might do 1,000 acres of planting. It might do 1,500 acres of spraying or 2,000 acres of spraying. That same dot power unit might do 1,000 acres of strip tilling. So now we're up to 4,000 acres. And let's say that they release a dot unit that has a grain cart on it. We have all these different uses for the same machine. So that cost per acre of that equipment goes down and down and down. And so the return on it is actually quite good. In my math, I don't know whether it's 50%, compared to buying a traditional piece, but it's significant. And that is where the fit is going to come in. The other piece too that I struggle with is that I'll get people that will tell me that, well, I can do this cheaper just by hiring a person. and doing it. Well, that's all well and good until you actually go to hire that person. And one of the side effects of higher wages and higher income is that as wages go up and as incomes go up, we find staff, people in general don't need to work the hours they needed to work before. If you are making $10 an hour, back when you're making $10 an hour, you needed all that overtime to make a living. If you're making $20 an hour as a skilled worker, or $20 or more, $25 an hour as a skilled worker, 40 hours a week is lots of times enough income. And so what's happening is that workers that are coming into agriculture, they don't want to work past 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night because they don't need to. The other piece of it is guess when all the accidents happen and all of the mistakes happen? They happen when people are working 15, 16-hour days, when they're working 7 days a week. And so it's fine to say that I can hire labor cheaper in theory, but when push comes to shove, it becomes difficult to hire the labor. It becomes difficult to do that. And those cost savings of trying to hire an employee are going up and up and up. And I think that we're seeing that where they're going to meet at some point that you can't hire that staff. It's either that or you're just not paying your staff enough. If you say you can hire employees cheaper, then likely you're not paying your staff enough money.
So, Chuck, what are the next steps we need to do in order to move autonomy into greater adoption, if that's where we should go?
Based on our experience, what we've seen, we need to standardize what we're doing. So I think where it all starts with is in the fields. As we go to our farms, we need to standardize, field entrances, make sure that we can get in and out of the fields with autonomous equipment. We need to make sure that all of those things that we haven't fixed all these years, like tile washouts and wet spots and obstacles in the fields, let's remove those things. Let's fix those things now, because you can't send something autonomous in there and then give it a challenge for no reason. There's enough challenges with the technology as it is, so let's not make it more challenging. So let's fix those things so that it's easier for just to standardize that process. I think from a farmer perspective, we need to standardize our equipment and our processes as much as we can. So within your operation, so standardize your row widths and your planters, your harvest widths, those types of things. Because that makes the automation process a lot cleaner. And then I think on the other side, when it comes to on the harvesting side, what I started to say earlier is that we're going to be getting an auto cart, an autonomous grain cart this fall. And one of the challenges we have with that is that every truck we have is a different size box. So some trucks hold 42 tons, some hold 32 tons. So that doesn't work in an autonomous system. So we need to have, we need to automate how the sizes of so as farmers are here thinking towards autonomy going forward, you need to start thinking about how do I standardize my fleet, as we go forward to make the transition easier.
Okay, well, thank you for all those insights. It's good to hear from somebody that's actually using some of these tools practically on their farm. And so thanks a lot for taking the time, Chuck.
All right, thank you.